My name is Tony Carter, and if you ask me about my life, I'll tell you it's like a long, dusty red road in my hometown of Texas. Straightforward, harsh, but always with warm stops that keep me from ever getting lost. I'm 32 years old now, a veteran who was discharged after 8 years of rolling around in distant lands, where every day was a battle with myself. These days, I run a small security services company on the outskirts of Dallas, specializing in protecting local businesses from unwanted troubles. My life is simple. Wake up early, work out, work hard, and never show off. I don't need luxury cars or mansions. An old pickup truck and a small apartment are enough. But behind that plain exterior, I carry valuable lessons from my paternal grandparents, the ones who saved my childhood from the coldness of my own flesh and blood family. Let me tell it from the beginning, because everything starts there. I was born and raised in a small town near the Texas border, where the sky is so vast it makes you feel like just a grain of sand. My father, Johnny Carter, was a successful businessman, at least on paper. He ran a real estate company, always busy with big contracts, long business trips, and cocktail parties where he bragged about his empire. My mother, Diane, was a well-known interior designer with clients from high society. They met in college, married young, and quickly plunged into the whirlwind of money and fame. My brother Jason, he's 3 years older than me, and I were born as part of the perfect family picture. But in reality, we were just forgotten decorations. I clearly remember those lonely evenings in the big house that my parents bought with bank loans. Jason and I would sit in front of the TV waiting for Mom and Dad to come home from late meetings. Dad often came home reeking of alcohol, muttering about some golden opportunity, then diving into his office. Mom would be exhausted, her eyes red from overwork, but she'd still try to smile and tell us, "Mom's building a future for you kids." Building a future? I thought to myself, but that future didn't include hugging us to sleep or listening to us talk about our school day. They neglected us not because of poverty, but because of ambition. Jason, my brother, followed their lead early on. He liked flashy things, new bikes, designer clothes, and always trying to win over Mom and Dad by showing off his academic achievements. As for me, I was quieter, preferring to sit alone reading books or running around in the fields. But deep down, I craved family warmth, something Mom and Dad could never provide. Fortunately, I got that affection from my paternal grandparents. They were like a cool breeze in a scorching desert. Grandpa Walter Carter and Grandma Margaret were the ones who changed everything. They lived on a large ranch not far from our house, where they had built a massive transportation and logistics empire. Blue Star Logistics, the name now echoes across the southern United States with hundreds of trucks hauling goods across states and modern warehouses. But my grandparents weren't the type to show off. Grandpa, a tall man with white hair and sharp eyes, always wore an old shirt and faded jeans. Grandma was gentle with a warm smile and homemade pies. They co-founded the company in the 1960s, starting with an old truck and a dream of independence. They taught me that success isn't about the money in the bank, but about integrity and relentless effort. The first time I truly bonded with my grandparents was when I was 8 years old. It was a sweltering summer afternoon, and Mom and Dad were arguing loudly about money. Dad wanted to invest in a risky project. Mom was worried about debts. They yelled in each other's faces, forgetting that Jason and I were sitting in the living room. Jason burst into tears and I ran out of the house, pedaling my bike straight to my grandparents' ranch. When I arrived, sweaty and teary-eyed, Grandpa was fixing an old tractor. He looked at me, said nothing, just handed me a wrench and said, "Help me out, grandson. Manual work will clear your mind." We worked until dark, and when Grandma called us for dinner, I felt like I was being embraced by a real family. Grandma made traditional Texas barbecue with cornbread and fresh salad. They didn't pry about the argument at home. Instead, Grandpa told stories about their early days. Grandma and I started from nothing, Tony. No one helped us, just our hands and faith. Never rely on others, son. From then on, I started spending most of my free time at the ranch. Mom and Dad didn't object. Maybe they were glad not to have to watch us. Jason sometimes came along, but he quickly gave up because he found it too boring. But I was hooked. Grandpa taught me to drive small trucks, fix machinery, and manage warehouses. "Business isn't about cheating, son," he often said, his voice warm but firm. "It's about building trust. A promise is a promise." Grandma taught me about being a person, cooking, tending the garden, and listening to others. She told me about their hardships in youth when they had to borrow money to buy their first truck, and how they paid it back on time even if it meant going hungry. "Independence is key, Tony," she said. "Don't let money control you. Control the money." Those lessons soaked into me like steady rain into the soil. When I was in high school, Mom and Dad started having financial troubles. Dad's company made bad investments and they had to borrow from my grandparents. I overheard tense conversations, Dad begging Grandpa for loans, promising quick repayment but then delaying. Mom crying to Grandma, complaining about life's pressures. My grandparents helped, but not without conditions. They required financial transparency, and Grandpa once said bluntly, "Johnny, you need to learn to live responsibly. Money isn't everything." Dad got angry, calling Grandpa stingy and outdated, and from then on their relationship grew more strained. Jason, by then a teenager, started following Dad's example. He liked spending extravagantly, borrowing from grandparents for luxury purchases, but rarely showing gratitude. Then there's Uncle Mark, my father's younger brother, my uncle, who's a different story. He lives far away in England, working for a finance company. He rarely visits, but when he does, he brings expensive gifts and stories of luxurious living. I wasn't close to him. He always looked at my grandparents with calculating eyes, asking about assets and the company. Grandpa once whispered to me, "Mark is a greedy child, Tony. I hope you won't be like that." I nodded, but I didn't fully understand then. The grandparents' housekeeper, Mr. Samuel Brooks, a middle-aged loyal man who'd worked for them for over 20 years, often told me about Uncle Mark. "Young master, your Uncle Mark asks a lot about the safe and documents. Luckily, your grandparents always have careful plans." Gradually, I realized the stark contrast between my grandparents and the rest of the family. They lived simply. Their ranch was large but not luxurious, with old furnishings full of memories. They donated to charity, supported the local community, and invested in the company to create jobs for hundreds of people. Meanwhile, my parents always chased after prestige, bigger houses, newer cars, but debts piled up. Jason became a younger version of Dad, showy, rarely thinking of others. Thanks to my grandparents, I chose a different path. After high school, I enlisted in the military, learning discipline and principles. Those years in the Army made me miss them terribly. I wrote letters to them every week, sharing about life, and they always replied with sincere advice. When I was discharged and started my security company, Grandpa was the first to support me. He hired my company to protect Blue Star Logistics warehouses, even though I insisted on not charging. "This is business, Tony," he laughed. "I trust you'll do well." Grandma sent cookies and well wishes. They became my spiritual pillars, especially when Mom and Dad started pressuring me. They wanted me to join the family business, but I refused because I saw the greed there clearly. My father's company, a real estate business that was spiraling downward, always needed fresh blood, as Dad put it. He called me every week, his voice a mix of sweetness and coercion. "Tony, you're the youngest son. You have to think about the family. Jason's already helping me, now it's your turn." But I knew better than anyone. Jason, my brother, had joined last year, and since then he'd changed completely. He drove luxury cars, wore designer clothes, but I'd heard rumors that the company was drowning in debt due to risky decisions. Mom and Dad borrowed more and more from my paternal grandparents, promising to repay but always delaying. I refused, and every time Mom would cry over the phone, "Don't you love the family, Tony? We need you." My heart ached, but I remembered Grandpa's words. "Don't let emotions cloud your principles, son." I chose to stay with my small company, where everything was clear, without the shadows of greed. Life went on like that, peaceful but meaningful. I called my grandparents every week, telling them about new contracts, the employees I was training. Grandpa laughed heartily over the phone. "You're doing great, Tony. Remember, security isn't just about locking doors. It's about protecting trust." Grandma asked about my health, sending photos of the vegetable garden she tended herself. They planned a vacation in Hawaii, the first in many years after being busy with the company. "We need to relax a bit," she said, her voice warm. "Take care of yourself." I nodded, glad that they were finally taking time for themselves. But I never expected that it would be the last time I heard their voices. I never expected that just a few days later my world would collapse. That morning I was in the office checking camera systems for a client when the phone rang. It was Dad. His voice trembled, not with the shake of sorrow, but with panic. "Tony, Grandpa and Grandma, their plane crashed. No miracles happened." I stood frozen, the phone nearly slipping from my hand. My heart pounded like it was being squeezed. Why did the plane crash? They were going on vacation, not to a battlefield. I rushed out of the office, driving like mad to the ranch. On the way, memories flooded back. Afternoons fixing the tractor with Grandpa, the pies Grandma baked, their smiles when I talked about the military. Tears blurred my vision, but I gritted my teeth, telling myself to be strong. That's what they taught me. When I arrived, the ranch was packed with people. Mom sat in a corner sobbing. Dad's face was flushed, pacing back and forth while talking on the phone with lawyers. Jason stood silently in a corner, his face pale, but his eyes darted around the house as if secretly calculating. Uncle Mark, Dad's younger brother living in England, flew back as soon as he heard. Dad told me to pick him up at the airport. When I got there, he was sitting in the waiting area with a large suitcase beside him. Seeing me, he approached for a stiff hug and said, "It's horrific, Tony. But you have to be strong. We have to be strong and united." It sounded emotional, but I still detected the falseness in his voice. When they were alive, he rarely visited, only occasionally calling to ask about assets. And I knew this time he came back not just for the funeral, but aiming for their massive fortune. The funeral was arranged quickly according to their wishes. Simple, at the local church. Hundreds came, company employees, friends, neighbors. They shared stories about them. How Grandpa helped local farmers, how Grandma organized charity for poor children. I stood by the coffins, fists clenched, trying to hold back tears. Dad spoke, his voice shrill. "My parents were great people, leaving a legacy for the next generation." But I saw him glance at Jason and Uncle Mark as if whispering something. Mom cried genuinely, but mixed in were questions about assets. Uncle Mark slyly asked the housekeeper Samuel about the safe key. The funeral atmosphere was heavy, not just from grief, but from the shadows lurking. A few days after the funeral, we were summoned to the lawyer's office. It was an old building in downtown Dallas, smelling of papers and stale coffee. Lawyer Matthew, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, a longtime friend of Grandpa, greeted us gravely. We sat around the conference table, me, Mom and Dad, Jason, Uncle Mark, and housekeeper Samuel, invited as a witness. My heart raced, not from anticipating inheritance, I'd never thought about it, but from worrying if their wishes would be respected. Dad sat straight, eyes gleaming. "I hope the will is fair." Uncle Mark nodded, fists clenched like he was ready for battle. Lawyer Matthew opened the envelope, his voice calm. "The will was made 2 years ago, last updated 6 months ago. Mr. Walter and Mrs. Margaret Carter leave their entire estate, including cash, real estate, shares in Blue Star Logistics, estimated at over $40 million to their grandson Anthony Carter." Dead silence enveloped the room. I was stunned, my ears ringing. The entire thing? To me? I'd never dreamed of it. Dad jumped up, face purple with rage. "What? This is absurd! Tony, did you manipulate them?" Mom burst into tears. "Son, what have you done?" Jason glared at me with hatred. "How many times did you sneak off to see them? Did you convince them?" Uncle Mark sneered. "This must be a mistake. We need to check again." I sat there, heart pounding, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. I hadn't manipulated anyone. I loved them genuinely, not for money. Lawyer Matthew raised his hand. "Please calm down." Mr. Walter left a video explanation. He turned on the projector and Grandpa's face appeared on the screen with Grandma beside him. Grandpa's voice rang out, warm but firm. "If you're watching this, it means we've passed. We love all of you, but this will is our final decision. Tony is the only one who lives by the values we taught. Independence, integrity, no greed. He cared for us truly, without exploiting. Johnny, Diane, Jason, Mark, you've borrowed many times, promised but not kept your word. We've seen the greed clearly. So, Margaret and I decided to let Tony protect this legacy." Grandma added, eyes glistening. "We trust Tony. Please respect this decision." The room exploded. Dad yelled, "The old man was insane. We'll sue." Mom cried, "Tony, you have to share. We're family." Jason lunged at me. "Sign the transfer, we'll manage together. I promise to give you a fair share." Uncle Mark interjected, "Yes, Tony. Don't be selfish. We'll divide it equally." I stood up, voice trembling but resolute. "No. I'll honor their wishes. This isn't my money. It's their legacy." As soon as the words left my mouth, everyone in the family looked at me like an enemy. Dad pointed. "You'll regret this. I'll sue, I'll show the whole business world your fake and greedy face. Everyone will know you're the thief of the inheritance." Jason nodded. "Yeah, I'll post on Facebook, Twitter. Everyone will see you're an ungrateful bastard." Uncle Mark smiled coldly. "You should think carefully, Tony. Otherwise, your reputation will crumble." I left the office with my head spinning, heart heavy. Housekeeper Samuel walked beside me. "Mr. Tony, they prepared you for this. Stay strong." On the way back, my phone buzzed nonstop, threatening messages from the family. Jason sent, "You're dead to me." Dad texted, "Think again, son. If not, don't blame me for being ruthless." But I didn't waver. I drove to the ranch, now mine, and knelt by their graves in the backyard. "I'll protect everything," I whispered, tears falling. That night I didn't sleep, thinking about what was coming. My family, my own flesh and blood, had become enemies. Their death wasn't just a loss, it was the fuse for a storm. The battle had just begun and I wasn't sure if I could win. About 10 days after my paternal grandparents' funeral, I decided to move permanently to their ranch, now under my ownership. I packed a few essentials, clothes, laptop, and an old gun from my military days, just in case. On the way, my phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from Jason. "You think you've won? I'll destroy your life." From Dad. "Think again, Tony. We're blood." Mom called, her voice choked. "Son, don't do this. I can't take it." I turned off the phone, focusing on the familiar dusty red road. My heart raced, not from fear, but from anger mixed with sorrow. How could they turn the pain of loss into a battle over money like this? When I parked in front of the gate, housekeeper Samuel Brooks was waiting on the porch. He was over 60, tall and thin, with silver hair and kind eyes, now looking weary, as if carrying an invisible burden like mine. Samuel had been the housekeeper for my grandparents since I was a child, witnessing everything, from warm family meals to tense arguments. "Mr. Tony," he called, his voice deep, "I knew you'd move in here sooner or later." I hugged him, feeling like I was embracing a piece of memory. "Samuel, do you know anything about the will? I'm feeling immense pressure about the inheritance my grandparents left me." Mr. Samuel nodded and led me inside. The scent of pine wood and baked goods still lingered, making me choke up. We sat in the kitchen where Grandma used to brew tea, and Samuel began to tell. His voice slow but weighty, like unveiling a long-hidden secret. "Your grandparents started preparing this plan many years ago, Mr. Tony," Samuel said, pouring me a steaming cup of coffee. "They knew their children's characters well. Mr. Walter often told me that Johnny and Mark were born with a greedy gene. They'd tear each other apart over money, Mrs. Margaret was sadder. She said they had to protect you because you were their only hope. I listened, my heart pounding. It turned out my grandparents weren't just wealthy in money but wise about people. They anticipated the disputes after their death, the lawsuits, threats, even violence. Samuel recounted that about 5 years ago when Grandpa discovered Dad secretly borrowing from the company fund for personal investments, he decided to act. They didn't want the legacy to fall into the hands of those who only knew how to spend, Samuel continued. They saw Jason following his father's footsteps, Uncle Mark sending emails from afar asking about shares. And you were the only one who visited without asking for anything. I felt a surge of emotion welling up. Memories flooded back. Afternoons when Grandpa taught me to drive trucks, Grandma telling stories of their tough startup days. They weren't easily fooled. They observed everything. Samuel led me to Grandpa's study, a dim wooden room with dusty bookshelves and a large safe. He unlocked it and pulled out a thick box of documents. "This is their plan," he said, his voice trembling. "Starting with the will." I flipped through it, my heart seeming to stop. The will had been updated 2 years ago, changing the main beneficiary from the sons to just me, Anthony Carter. But it didn't stop there. Attached were a series of medical documents, cognitive evaluation results from 3 independent doctors, all confirming that my grandparents were fully mentally competent. Samuel explained, "With these documents, your family can't accuse them of being senile or insane when transferring the assets to you. They were completely sound of mind when amending the will." I slumped into the chair, my hands shaking as I held the papers. Anxiety mixed with gratitude. Had they thought this far ahead? I imagined them visiting the doctors, joking but serious. "We need these papers to protect our grandson." Samuel continued, "That's just the beginning. The most important part is the Asset Protection Trust." He handed me a thick stack of documents filled with legal clauses. I skimmed, trying to understand. My grandparents had transferred most of their assets into this trust 3 years ago. Cash, real estate like the ranch and warehouses, shares in Blue Star Logistics, total value over $40 million. I was the sole beneficiary, but not in a spend-freely way. The trust stipulated clearly, I could only withdraw money or use assets according to the purposes they set, maintaining and expanding the company, doing charity for those in need, maintaining the house, supporting the local community. No selling land, no risky investments, and absolutely no transferring to anyone else unless it fit the trust's purposes. "This protects you from pressure," Samuel said, his eyes lighting up. "Your family can't force you to sign over anything because you don't own it directly. The trust is overseen by a board, including lawyer Matthew and some longtime associates. If you're tempted or threatened, they'll intervene." I breathed a sigh of relief but also felt the weight. This wasn't my money. It was a legacy to protect. I pictured Mom and Dad showing up begging, "Just a portion, Tony." But now, I had a legitimate reason to refuse, not selfishness, but respect for my grandparents. Samuel smiled sadly. "They knew you wouldn't abuse it. They said Tony will use the money for good, unlike the others." Then Samuel opened another drawer, pulling out a USB and a diary. "This is evidence," he whispered, as if afraid of eavesdroppers. Grandpa's diary detailed the family's greedy behaviors. Dates when Dad borrowed $100,000 for investments, but actually bought a luxury car. Emails from Uncle Mark asking about shares with promises to split. Messages Jason sent to Grandma, demanding money for a new phone and forgetting to thank her. And videos from security cameras, scenes of Dad arguing with Grandpa about money, calling him stingy. Mom crying and begging, but behind his back whispering to Jason, "We have to get our share." I watched, my heart constricting. My own flesh and blood, how could they be like this? "They kept it to go public if needed," Samuel said. "If they sue or smear you, use this. It'll end everything." Tension mounted as I thought about the days ahead. My phone buzzed again, a call from an unknown number, probably a local reporter tipped off by Jason. I turned it off, focusing on Samuel. "Is there more?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He nodded. "The legal protection contract." He handed me a copy of the agreement with lawyer Matthew, the one who read the will. My grandparents had hired Matthew 4 years ago, entrusting him with all documents: will, medical reports, evidence. The contract stipulated, after their death, Matthew would handle all disputes, representing me without my direct involvement. "He's an old friend of Mr. Walter," Samuel recounted. "They played golf together. Matthew promised to protect you to the end." I called Matthew right away. His voice over the phone was steady. "Tony, don't worry. We have ironclad evidence. If the family sues, they'll lose humiliatingly." Finally, Samuel led me to the garage where the security system was installed. "This is the last part," he said. "They hired your own security company to protect it." I was surprised. Cameras everywhere, electronic safe, cloud-stored data. The contract was signed a year ago, assigning my company to manage everything: the house, safe, even the company servers. "When they passed, the system automatically transferred control to you," Samuel explained. "No one can enter without your code." I checked the app on my phone. Everything was connected. My heart raced with excitement. The family could show up anytime, but now I had protection from legal to physical. That night, I lay on Grandpa's bed, thoughts swirling endlessly. Their plan was perfect to the point of being frightening, like a preset battlefield. But why did they have to do this? Out of love for me or disappointment in their children? Tears fell again. The morning after, tension escalated when Jason texted, "I know you're at the ranch. I'll come find you soon enough." I called my security team right away. "Mike, beef up the guard at the main gate and side roads. My family might show up any time." Mike, a former comrade from the military, replied curtly, "Roger that, boss. We're ready." My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from excitement mixed with determination. I'd survived battles in distant deserts where every second was life or death. Now this battle was right at home, with my own flesh and blood. Samuel came in with a breakfast tray, toasted bread and black coffee, just like Grandma used to make. "Mr. Tony, eat before it gets cold. Today will be a long day." He sat down, his eyes worried. We talked about what was coming. Samuel shared more about my grandparents. They once said, "If there's a dispute, face it head on. Don't avoid it, because avoidance only lets the bad ones run wild." I nodded, remembering Grandpa's words. "Son, the truth is the strongest weapon." I decided not to wait any longer. If the family wanted to claim back the assets, I'd turn their arrival into a public confrontation. No avoidance, but striking right at the root. I called lawyer Matthew immediately. "Matthew, my family is preparing to come to the ranch. I want to organize a meeting, not just empty arguments, but with witnesses." He agreed right away. "Good, Tony. I'll bring all the documents. I know a retired judge, Mr. Harlan, an old friend of Mr. Walter. He can act as a neutral arbitrator." I thanked him, my heart feeling a bit lighter. Next was the local sheriff, Mr. Ramirez, someone my grandparents had helped when building the community fire station. "Tony, I'll send 2 officers over in case things get out of hand," he said, his voice calm. Then the witnesses, a few longtime employees from Blue Star Logistics who had seen Dad borrowing money. And Samuel, of course. Finally, I contacted the local media, a reporter from the Dallas Morning News and a local news channel. "This is a story about an inheritance dispute with evidence of greed," I said. They agreed to come because hot news is always appealing. The preparations took the whole morning. I paced around the house, checking the security cameras via the app. Every angle was covered: the main gate, garage, even the backyard where my grandparents' graves were. My staff installed additional motion sensors, and Mike reported, "Boss, if they try to break in, the alarm will blare." I felt like I was preparing for a real battlefield, not with guns and bullets, but with truth and legality. But deep down, I was sad. How had things come to this? I remembered my childhood days when Jason and I played at the ranch, and my grandparents laughed happily. Now Jason had become an enemy, ready to find me to demand money. Around noon, my phone buzzed nonstop. Mom called, "Tony, son, let's talk. I don't want lawsuits." Her voice trembled, but I knew behind it was pressure from Dad and Jason. "Mom, if you want to talk, come to the ranch. But you have to respect the will," she cried. "You're too stubborn. We're family." I hung up, my heart aching. Uncle Mark emailed. He hadn't gone back to England yet, but stayed in Dallas. "Tony, don't complicate things. Let's meet. Divide it fairly." Fairly? I smiled bitterly. What was fair when they'd borrowed hundreds of thousands from my grandparents without repaying? Then they arrived. Around 3 in the afternoon, I saw through the cameras 2 cars parked outside the gate, Mom and Dad's car and Uncle Mark's rental with Jason in the back. They got out, faces flushed with anger. Dad yelled through the gate, "Open the gate, Tony! We need to talk." Jason banged on the iron door. "Don't be a coward, come out." Mom stood behind, her eyes red. Uncle Mark was calmer, but his eyes were calculating. The security staff blocked them. "Please wait, the owner will open it." I took a deep breath and pressed the remote button to open the gate. They stormed in like a hurricane, heading straight into the house. Samuel greeted them on the porch. "Please come to the living room." I stood there, fists clenched, trying to stay calm. They sat down on the sofa, where my grandparents used to entertain guests. Dad started right away. "Tony, who do you think you are? That will is forged. We'll sue and you'll lose everything." Jason jumped in. "Yeah, I've posted about it online. Everyone's calling you the inheritance thief." Uncle Mark smirked. "I have lawyers in England. We can drag this out for years, Tony. Why not sign the transfer? We'll manage together, divide equally." Mom cried, "Son, think about Mom. Dad's company is in debt. We need the money." I looked at them, my heart twisting. This was my family, the people who'd once shared meals, but now all I saw was greed. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I said, "Fine, but we'll talk openly." I opened the back door and everyone came in. Lawyer Matthew with his briefcase of documents, Judge Harlan, a tall old man with silver hair, Sheriff Ramirez with 2 officers, the witnesses from the company, and the reporters with recording devices. The living room suddenly became crowded. My family was stunned. Dad stammered, "What is this?" "You called the whole village?" Jason's face went pale. "You're playing dirty." I stood in the middle, my voice firm. "Not playing dirty. This is a confrontation. My grandparents prepared evidence, and today everyone will hear it." Matthew began. "According to the will and the trust fund, Tony is the legal beneficiary. Any accusations of insanity are invalid thanks to the medical reports." Mr. Harlan nodded. "I've reviewed it. The will is solid." Then it was my turn. I opened my laptop, connecting it to the large screen, a device Grandpa used for company meetings. "Now let's see the evidence they left." My heart pounded, excited like before a battle. I played the first video, a scene of Dad arguing with Grandpa 2 years ago. "You're stingy, lending money and demanding interest." Dad's face turned purple. "That's private." But I continued. "And here's the $150,000 loan Dad promised to repay in 6 months, but 2 years later, not a cent." I read an email aloud. "Johnny borrowed for real estate investment, but actually bought a car for Jason." Jason jumped up. "Lies!" But I played the message he sent to Grandma. "Grandma, give me $5,000 for a phone. I promised to pay back." And the invoice showed he hadn't. Mom cried louder. "Stop, Tony." I shook my head. "Not done yet. Uncle Mark, here's a recorded call from you. When they die, we'll split the shares evenly." Uncle Mark's face turned green. "You spied on me?" I replied, "Not me. They kept it for protection. And here's security camera footage. You rummaging through Grandpa's drawer last year." The room fell dead silent. The reporters scribbled furiously. The sheriff looked stern. I continued reading aloud each item. Unpaid loans totaling over $500,000, fraudulent behaviors like embezzling from the family company, insults toward my grandparents, outdated, stingy. Samuel testified, "I saw it all." They were heartbroken. Company employees recounted, "Mr. Johnny borrowed from the employee fund, promised to repay, but we haven't seen it." Judge Harlan interjected, "This is clear evidence of greed. If it goes to court, you'll be at a huge disadvantage." My family sat there, faces pale. Dad muttered, "You'll regret this." Jason said loudly, "You think you've won? Don't dream." I looked straight at them. "If you keep making trouble, I'll go public with everything, press, social media, court. Everyone will know the truth." The atmosphere in the living room was heavy, like a storm about to break. I could feel the trembling in my hands as I held the remote control for the screen, but I didn't stop. This was the moment to end it, not with violence, but with truth and clear boundaries. The reporter from the Dallas Morning News scribbled furiously, their recording devices clicking like a countdown. Sheriff Ramirez stood in a corner, his eyes scanning everyone, ready to intervene if anyone lost their cool. My mom sat huddled on the chair, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Tony, why are you doing this to us?" Uncle Mark maintained his fake calm, glancing at his watch as if calculating his flight time back to England. But I knew, behind that facade was panic. Their division plan was crumbling. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart pounded like a war drum. "I didn't want things to go this far," I said, looking straight into each of their eyes. "My grandparents taught me that family is important. But family must be based on trust and respect. You've broken that a long time ago. But I'm still giving you one last chance." Matthew, my lawyer, nodded and handed me a stack of papers, a document I'd drafted with him last night after reviewing all the evidence. It was the conditions for accessing the legacy, a simple but ironclad agreement, printed in black and white, with my signature at the bottom. I read it aloud, my voice echoing in the room. Condition 1. Respect the will of Mr. Walter and Mrs. Margaret Carter with no disputes over the will or the trust fund. Condition 2. Cease all threats, defamation, baseless lawsuits, or spreading rumors on social media and in the business world. Condition 3. Return all items taken from my grandparents' home after their passing. I paused, letting the words sink in. Samuel interjected, his voice trembling but resolute. "I've listed the details, Mr. Tony. The valuable items taken from the house include Grandma Margaret's pearl necklace, gifted by a business partner in New York, a memento of 30 years of collaboration. She treasured it because it symbolized trust. Then the antique painting by a local artist which Grandpa Walter bought in the 70s hung in the living room as a reminder of their Texas roots. Other antiques, a Chinese porcelain vase from Asian colleagues, and Grandpa's gold watch that he wore his whole life, engraved with Grandma's name. All of it was captured on camera, not ordinary theft, but borrowing without returning." The room fell into dead silence. Jason's face flushed red, awkwardly looking away. Dad gritted his teeth. "Those were just keepsakes." But I knew better. Those items were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they took them as if they owned them. I continued reading. "Anyone who signs this document will be considered for support from the legacy, not arbitrary cash splits, but according to the purposes set by my grandparents, charity work, supporting the local community, or expanding businesses with clear, transparent plans. I'll review it under the supervision of the trust fund." Matthew added, "This is legal and beneficial for everyone if you cooperate." I looked at them, hoping for a spark. Maybe Mom would sign or Uncle Mark would reconsider. But then the most important part. Anyone who doesn't sign will be completely barred from access. No entry to the ranch, no contact with Blue Star Logistics, no penny from the legacy. And I'll use all the evidence, diaries, videos, emails, to pursue legal action, including theft of property. My heart raced faster, anxiously awaiting their reactions. This was a double-edged sword, offering them an out, but also the final boundary. The reporter asked, "Mr. Tony, does this document have legal effect?" Matthew nodded. "Yes, and we'll notarize it today if needed." My family exchanged glances, whispering. Mom took the paper, her hands shaking. "Tony, can Mom sign? I don't want to lose you." But Dad snatched it back. "Don't, Diane. This is a trap. We don't need to beg from this brat." Jason jumped up. "I'm not signing." "You think I need your charity money? I'll handle it myself." Uncle Mark smiled coldly. "Tony, you're too naive. I'll sue from England, and we'll see who wins." They refused. Mom, Dad, and Jason stormed out in anger without a goodbye. Dad slammed the door so hard the glass rattled. "You'll be alone for life, Tony." Jason turned back and yelled, "Just wait! I'll destroy your reputation." Mom gave me one last look, tears falling. "Son," before being dragged away. Uncle Mark quietly went to his car, but his eyes promised revenge. The living room suddenly felt empty with only Samuel's sigh and the reporter's scribbling. Judge Harlan patted my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Tony." They chose their own path. But my heart was heavy. This wasn't victory but loss. The family shattered, and I was the one holding the knife. I didn't wait. That very afternoon, I drove to Sheriff Ramirez's office. "I want to file a complaint," I said, handing over the file Samuel had prepared, a list of missing items, camera videos showing Jason taking the painting, Dad grabbing the watch, Mom wearing the pearl necklace out of the house after the funeral. "This is theft of property," I explained, my voice hoarse. Ramirez nodded. "We'll handle it. With this evidence, the case will be resolved quickly." Matthew came along, adding, "And we'll demand compensation and a public apology." On the way back, my phone buzzed, a message from Jason. "You're really suing? I hate you." I turned it off, tears streaming. Anxiety mixed with fear. Would they retaliate? But I remembered Grandpa's words. "Son, principles are everything." In the following days, tension mounted. The press reported Carter family in turmoil. Tony sues relatives over stolen legacy. Friends called in support, but there were also bad rumors from Jason on social media. He posted implying I was cruel. I responded publicly through my lawyer, "The truth will prevail." Mom called crying, "Tony, withdraw the complaint, son." But I refused. Mom signed the document and everything stops. She hung up, and since then silence. Uncle Mark emailed threats of international lawsuits, but Matthew laughed. They have no grounds. I spent time at the ranch, walking in the garden, thinking about my grandparents. The missing items, not just monetary value, but memories. The pearl necklace Grandma wore at her son's wedding, the painting Grandpa bought at a local fair. Samuel recounted, "They treasured them because they were gifts from friends and colleagues, symbols of trust." I cried, but remained determined. The lawsuit began. Court summons, evidence presented. Mom, Dad, and Jason appeared, looking gaunt. The judge watched the videos. "This is clearly theft." They were forced to return the items and pay legal fees. Jason shouted in court, "I won't forgive you." But they lost. After the lawsuit, I felt empty. The family stopped contacting me, but I had Samuel, Matthew, and my grandparents' legacy. I started fulfilling the trust's purposes, supporting the community. But late at night, I lay awake, wondering, would they come back one day? The tension still lingered, but I was stronger. This was the lesson. Family isn't blood, but choice. In the days following the lawsuit, the ranch became my sanctuary. Not just a home, but a vivid reminder of my grandparents. I wandered through the garden where Grandma had once tended the rose beds and stood before their graves, whispering, "I'm trying, Grandpa and Grandma." Every step on this land seemed to infuse me with strength, but it also weighed heavily on my heart. The stolen items, the pearl necklace, the antique painting, the gold watch, had been returned via mail, accompanied by a scrap of paper from Jason. "I hate you. I looked at those objects, carefully placing them back on the shelf in the living room where they belonged. Not for their monetary value, but because they were memories, symbols of my grandparents' trust in friends and colleagues. But the joy was incomplete. Mom sent a handwritten letter, her script shaky. "Son, I regret it." But she didn't sign the conditions document, and I knew that regret was just words spoken in desperation. I decided not to let sorrow drown me. My grandparents had left the trust fund not for me to live in regret, but to create something good. One morning, I sat with Samuel and Matthew in Grandpa's study discussing the future. "We need to fulfill their wishes," I said, my voice resolute. They wanted this estate to help others: veterans, poor students, company employees. Matthew nodded, flipping through the trust documents. 20% of annual profits for charity, 30% to maintain Blue Star Logistics, the rest for property upkeep and controlled investments. "How do you want to start?" I immediately thought of my military days, the comrades who struggled after discharge, homeless and jobless, and the kids in town walking miles to school because their families couldn't afford transportation. "Let's set up a foundation," I said. "The Walter and Margaret Carter Foundation for veterans, poor students, and company employees." Samuel smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Great idea, Mr. Tony. They'd be proud." We got to work right away. Matthew contacted financial experts to establish the foundation, ensuring all expenditures were transparent and on purpose. I spent the whole week meeting with Blue Star Logistics employees, those who'd worked for my grandparents for decades. They shared stories about Grandpa, who always paid salaries on time, and Grandma, who organized Christmas parties for employees' families. "We trust you, Tony," a warehouse manager said. "You're like Mr. Walter, strict but fair." I smiled, but my heart felt heavy. I didn't want to be just an heir. I wanted to amplify their values. The Walter and Margaret Carter Foundation was born a month later, with a launch ceremony right at the ranch. I kept the house intact, from the antique painting on the wall to the chair Grandpa used to sit in. It wasn't just a home, but a community center, the foundation's office. We held the first event, awarding scholarships to 20 poor students in town. The children stood in the yard, their eyes shining as they received books and financial aid. A little girl about 10 years old hugged me. "I'll study really hard, Uncle Tony." I choked up, remembering Grandma's words. "Education is the door out of poverty, Tony." That evening, we hosted a small party, inviting local veterans too. I stood among them, telling stories about my grandparents and their dreams. Everyone applauded, but my eyes stung. This was the first time I truly felt the meaning of the legacy. Not money, but changing lives. In parallel, I expanded my security company. Blue Star Logistics needed better protection, especially after the threats from my family. I partnered with their company, installing modern camera systems, training new staff, and ensuring benefits for the old ones. A longtime employee, Linda, who'd worked with Grandma, held my hand. "You're keeping this company alive just as they wanted." I raised salaries, opened a welfare fund, and committed to no layoffs just for profit. My security firm grew quickly, taking on more contracts from local businesses. But I always reminded the staff, we protect trust, not just assets. As time passed, the ranch became a vibrant hub. I organized community events, farmers markets, skill classes for veterans, outdoor movie nights for kids. Every time I saw the crowd laughing and talking, it was as if I could see my grandparents standing there smiling. Samuel became my right-hand man, helping with management. "You're doing better than they ever hoped," he said one evening as we sat by the campfire. I shook my head. "I'm just following them, Samuel." But in my heart, I knew I was building the legacy, not just protecting it, but expanding it. Then, just as I feared, the family came back. About 6 months after the lawsuit, Dad's real estate company collapsed. I heard from a friend. Dad had borrowed from loan sharks to save it, but failed. Jason was sued for financial fraud. He'd borrowed money from partners without repaying. Mom called first, her voice weak. "Tony, Mom needs help." Dad's company is bankrupt. We have nothing left. I sat in the study looking at the photo of my grandparents on the desk, my heart constricting. Mom, I laid out the conditions. Respect the will. Return the items. End the threats. She cried, I regret it now, but your dad won't listen. I hung up, my hands shaking. Then Jason texted, You're rich and letting your family starve? Give me $50,000 and I'll shut up. I didn't reply. Uncle Mark called from England. Tony, I'm about to go bankrupt. Just a small amount from the legacy and I won't sue anymore. I smiled bitterly. They still thought I was easily swayed. I refused them all, citing the conditions document. If you want support, sign and do right, I told Mom in the last call. She went silent, then hung up, but they didn't stop. A week later, Jason posted on social media, calling me a selfish thief of the inheritance. A local tabloid jumped in with a headline, $1 million heir abandons family. Uncle Mark gave a video interview whining, Tony exploited my parents' trust. I read it and felt my blood boil. They hadn't reformed, they just wanted to extort. I didn't wait any longer. Calling Matthew, I said, go public with everything. We held a press conference at the ranch, inviting major media like the Dallas Morning News and national news channels. In front of dozens of reporters, I played videos. Dad yelling in Grandpa's face, calling him stingy. Jason begging for money to buy a car and forgetting to repay. Uncle Mark plotting to divide the assets. I read aloud from my grandparents' diary, Johnny, Jason, Mark, they only want money, not family. Samuel testified, his voice choked. They were heartbroken seeing their children's greed. Matthew presented documents. Unpaid loans, theft after the funeral. Reporters fired questions and I answered, I'm not keeping the money for myself. It's helping veterans, poor children, company employees, just as they wanted. The news spread fast. New articles. The truth about the Carter legacy, greed destroys family. Social media turned, Jason was criticized. Uncle Mark went silent. Mom called, crying, Tony, I'm sorry. But I replied, you know the conditions. They had no moves left. Every attempt at extortion or defamation was quashed. I breathed a sigh of relief, but without joy. The ranch remained vibrant, the foundation grew, but my family was lost forever. That afternoon, I sat by my grandparents' graves, telling them about the foundation, about the students' smiles. I've done it, I whispered. The tension dissolved, replaced by peace. My grandparents' legacy lived on, not just in money, but in the values I upheld. Under the hazy moonlight of Texas, the ranch was unusually quiet, with only the wind whispering through the rose beds that Grandma had once tended so carefully. I sat on the old wooden bench where Grandpa used to smoke his pipe and tell stories from the past, feeling as if they were still here, watching my every step. The battle with my family, my own flesh and blood who had once meant everything, had left an unfillable void in me. But it was in that void that I discovered the true meaning of the legacy my grandparents left behind. Not the $40 million, not the company shares or the vast land, but the lessons of principles, honor, and trust. I stood up, placing my hand on the cold stone marker, whispering once more, I won't let you down. In the months that followed, I poured all my energy into the Walter and Margaret Carter Foundation. Each day that passed, the foundation proved its value more and more. We awarded additional scholarships, this time 50 to poor students in 3 neighboring towns. I visited each school, met each child, and heard their stories, orphans, children of farmers, or families struggling with debt. A boy named Miguel gripped my hand after the ceremony, his eyes shining. I want to become an engineer, Uncle Tony. I won't let Mr. and Mrs. Carter down. I smiled, but my heart choked up. I saw myself in him from years ago when my grandparents gave me the faith that I could achieve anything, as long as I didn't give up. The foundation also supported veterans, people like me who returned from the battlefield with scarred souls. We organized skill classes, job placements, and even built a small counseling center right at the ranch. An older veteran with silver-streaked hair told me, "You've given me hope, Tony." I thought my life was over. Those words were worth more than any possession. Blue Star Logistics, my grandparents' company, also flourished under the new management. I worked closely with the old team, those loyal to Grandpa from the early days. They recounted how he used to drive trucks through the night to deliver on time, or how Grandma meticulously recorded every penny to keep the company afloat. I followed their example, ensuring employee salaries increased steadily, welfare funds were maintained, and investments in new technology for competition. My security company collaborated tightly with Blue Star Logistics, providing modern protection systems for the warehouses. Every time I signed a new contract, I remembered Grandpa's words. Business is about building trust. I kept that promise not just with clients, but with employees too, those who now called me Boss Tony with genuine respect. The ranch remained the heart of everything. I kept the house unchanged, from Grandpa's armchair to Grandma's dusty bookshelves. It became the foundation's office, where I met with Matthew and advisors, but also a community space. Monthly, we hosted events, farmers markets, small concerts, cooking classes based on Grandma's recipes. Locals flocked in, laughing and chatting, children running across the fields. An elderly woman, once a friend of Grandma's, held my hand. "Margaret would be so proud, Tony. You've turned this place into a home for everyone." I smiled, but my eyes stung. This was exactly what they wanted, a living legacy spreading love and hope, but not everything was smooth. My family, despite losing the lawsuit and having the evidence exposed, didn't give up. A year later, as I prepared for the foundation's anniversary celebration, Mom called again. Her voice was frail, like someone exhausted. "Tony, I have nothing left. Your dad lost everything. Jason's hiding from debts. Help me, son." I sat in the study, looking at the photo of my grandparents, my heart aching. "Mom, I've made the conditions clear. Respect the will, return what's taken, end the threats." She cried, "I don't have the strength to argue anymore." I hung up, my hands shaking. Jason texted right after, his tone changed. "Tony, I was wrong. Give me a chance. I just need $10,000 to pay off debts." I didn't reply. Uncle Mark sent a long email, whining about bankruptcy in England, asking me to share a little from the legacy. I forwarded it to Matthew. They haven't changed. Then they attacked again. Jason posted anew on social media, calling me heartless, abandoning family in hard times. Some tabloids jumped in with cheap headlines. "Millionaire Tony Carter refuses to help parents." I read it and felt my blood boil. They hadn't apologized, hadn't signed the document, just wanted to use public pressure to force me. I called Matthew and Samuel, "Let's go public one last time." We held a second press conference right at the ranch. Before the media, I presented everything again. Videos of Dad insulting my grandparents, Jason's messages demanding money, Uncle Mark's emails plotting to divide assets. I stated clearly, I'm not keeping the legacy for myself. It's helping hundreds, students, veterans, employees. My family had chances, but they chose greed. Matthew added, "The trust fund doesn't allow dividing assets outside of charitable and company development purposes." Samuel recounted, his voice choked. They were heartbroken seeing their children's greed. This time, public opinion swung fully to me. New articles in the Dallas Morning News. Tony Carter protects legacy with honor. Social media turned. Jason was heavily criticized and had to lock his account. Uncle Mark stopped responding to interviews. Mom called one last time, her voice weary. "Tony, I'm sorry, but I can't convince your dad." I replied, "You know I've tried." That was the last we spoke. They had no more tricks for extortion or defamation. The legacy was protected not just legally, but by the truth. I gradually understood the deepest lesson my grandparents left. Family isn't always blood relations. Samuel, Matthew, the company employees, the scholarship kids, the veterans finding hope. They were my family, sharing values and mutual respect. One evening, as I hosted an outdoor party for the community, watching everyone laugh under the lights, I felt my grandparents there, smiling. I stood up, raising a glass. Thank you all for keeping the Walter and Margaret Carter legacy alive. Applause rang out, and I knew I'd done right. The message of this story isn't in the $40 million. The real power is holding firm to principles and honor no matter the cost. I lost my blood family but found a true one, those building a better world with me. I go to sleep each night, no longer restless but with gratitude. My grandparents taught me to stand tall, and I'll continue for them, for myself, and for those who believe in me.